Hello, everyone.
It's like 65, 70 people.
Nice.
Good afternoon. I am Amani Jamal, the Dean of the School of Public and International Affairs, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's discussion. Today is the latest installment in our series of events on the Israel-Hamas War. At SPIA, we strive to provide our students and the public with the most in-depth analysis of current affairs. Since October 7th, SPIA has sponsored multiple events offering a variety of perspectives on the war. Our faculty have published quick reaction pieces and op-eds from The Economist to The New York Times and are helping to steer the conversation on this vitally important issue. Today, I am proud to welcome you to our next conversation on the issue, a sit-down dialogue with one of Israel's most important thinkers and advocates on the issue of civil and human rights. I invited Noa Sattath to come to visit Princeton for the day long before the current conflict between Israel and Hamas unfolded. She was scheduled to spend the day on campus as part of my Dean Speaker Series, which invites influencers from all over the world to meet with our students, faculty, and members of the public. Her talk was going to focus on the judicial reform debate in Israel. Little did I know that her voice would be as important as ever at Princeton and the world as we try to make sense of this latest conflict between Israel and Hamas. Ms. Sattath is still going to touch on the judicial reform debate in Israel, but the focus of her talk will be on the Israel-Hamas War and the challenges for civil and human rights during this conflict. Noa is on the front lines today trying to ensure that civil liberties and civil rights are protected during these difficult times. This includes the right to freedom of speech and association, the right to dignity, and the right to equal protection of the laws. I also know that Noa is fighting hard to release hostages, as she personally knows some of them, and she's trying to ensure that international humanitarian law is respected and that civilian lives are protected. Noa Sattath is the executive director of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel. For those of you who are not familiar with ACRI, it is Israel's oldest and most prominent civil and human rights organization, and it is commonly referred to as the ACLU of Israel. Just last year, it celebrated its 50-year anniversary as an independent and nonpartisan organization. It regularly argues before the Israeli Supreme Court, including just last month challenging the judicial reform efforts. ACRI has a long history of winning before the court, including cases protecting same-sex marriage, challenging housing discrimination against Arab residents, and challenging the interrogation techniques used by security services against Palestinian detainees. Noa Sattath took the helm of ACRI in 2021. She is an ordained Reform rabbi, the immediate past director of the Israel Religious Action Center, and previously served as executive director of the Jerusalem Open House for Pride and Tolerance and Me, an organization that brought together young Israelis and Palestinians from Israel and the West Bank. In conversation with Noa today will be Udi Ofer, the John L. Weinberg Visiting Professor and Lecturer of Public and International Affairs at SPIA, and the founding director of the Princeton Policy Advocacy Clinic. Professor Ofer spent 2 decades as an attorney with the ACLU, including serving as the organization's deputy national political director and executive director of the ACLU of New Jersey. Professor Ofer also chairs the International Advisory Council of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel. His work and writings have regularly appeared in national media outlets, cited by court opinions throughout the nation, and have appeared in more than 100 law review articles. We could not ask for a better pair of discussants of civil and human rights within Israel than Noa Sattath and Udi Ofer. I thank Noa and Udi for their willingness to share their thoughts with us, and I look forward to their conversation. Please join me in welcoming Noa Sattath and Udi Ofer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you, Dean Jamal. It has been such an honor to be at SPIA, really, for the past, since I came here, but particularly over the last 2 weeks. You know, this has been a very trying time for anyone who cares about peace, about humanity, about dignity. And it has been inspiring to see Dean Jamal's leadership during this time. And I'm so proud of SPIA and the work that we've generated. And as Dean Jamal said, this is just one of a series of events. I want to also recognize that we have here Salam Fayyad, who is one of the leading thinkers in the world, really, about what a future Palestinian nation could look like. And it's such a privilege to have him here on faculty as a former prime minister of Palestine. And so I encourage folks who are interested in this issue to pay attention today, to ask good questions, but also look and review the other materials that SPIA has put out. It's on our website. Dean Jamal also has a piece today that just went up on foreign affairs. So I encourage people to read this. I also want to thank you, Noah. This is your first visit outside of Israel since the October 7th massacre. And I know that you have a family, I know that you have children, and I know that it isn't easy to leave during this time of war and crisis. So I know that you're worried about your own family, and you also are thinking about the many people in Israel and Gaza who are right now in peril and really are fighting for dignity, for humanity, and for life, really. I also know, and I want to share this anecdote, I've been schlepping Noah around campus all day. She started off at a 10 a.m. meeting, and it's been nonstop since then. But this morning, we walked over, as you do in Princeton, to Small World Coffee, right, to get her a bagel. And when we walked through the Makash Hall archway, Noah turns around, she's like, oh, I know that person. And it was the posters of one of the hostages. And he was like, oh, I know them. And I think that really kind of centers this conversation in a way that I want to begin it. And that is, we're going to get into politics, right? We're going to get into human rights. But I want to get into the humanity first. Because I think too often we talk past each other, yet this is all very personal and real for many, many, many people. So I just wanted to start the conversation, Noah, by just asking you, how are you feeling right now?
So first I want to say thank you for having me, and thank you to Dean Jamal for the honor of being part of the speaker series, and for all of you today who came to grapple with complex questions at this time of mourning and fear and sadness. I think that I feel like we're in the middle of an earthquake, and the ground has not stopped moving. But we already see the devastation that is caused both in Israel with the constantly unfolding stories of what happened on October 7th, and it feels like you're peeling an onion and crying, and then there's another layer, and you kind of wonder how many layers are left. And also in seeing the heartbreaking devastation in Gaza, that is terrifying and horrifying, and also other human rights violations in the West Bank and inside Israel.
So can you talk a bit, and again, we're going to get into the other stuff, but I want you to draw a picture. What did October 7th look like for you? Describe to me that day, because I know I remember 9/11 and what that felt like. I could describe to you in detail. Yeah. What did October 7th look like for you?
So I kind of like, let's go back to October 6th. So on October 6th, I was living a life full of anxiety over an anti-democratic revolution that was happening in Israel, and taking part in what we described as the largest protest movement in history, in a per capita way, of constant demonstrations against the government. And that was a time of a lot of fear about processes that were going on in Israel, and also an understanding that they were weakening Israel, but completely oblivious to what was to come. And I got up with our baby and promised my wife that I would let her sleep in at least until 11 that Shabbat, because he had had a very rough week. And I was watching the news evolve, and when I saw the Hamas militants inside Sderot, I decided that I would break my promise to my wife, and I woke her up. And then there was sirens of alarms going on in Jerusalem, and so we took all of the children. We don't have a safe room or a shelter against bombs in our house, and we moved to.
And this is in Jerusalem, right?
This is in Jerusalem, and we moved to our in-laws. And I was texting with an American friend, and I was looking at this image of the car in Sderot, and I wrote to her, and I said, "This is like January 6th. This is like an image that I never thought I would see in my lifetime, of a breach of like very basic concepts, just like the fact that there could be Hamas militants inside an Israeli city undisturbed. It shocked me. And then as the day progressed and the scope of the devastation was becoming more and more clear, I wrote her, no, it's not at all like January 6th, it's like 9/11. And I think, when I think about it today, as we have more understanding of what happened and what is happening since, I think that the most relevant historic event for us, it's like the pogroms in Eastern Europe, of feeling like there's no protection, and just in this time, an attack that has no boundaries, or at least no boundaries for a while.
So that's October 7th. So describe to me what are the themes over the last couple of weeks, both as a mom, as a wife, but also as the head of the largest and most prominent civil and human rights organization in Israel. What does that life look like over the last couple of weeks?
So it is intense. On the one hand, we have our staff, like almost everybody in Israel, has suffered losses of friends and family, and knows people who have been kidnapped. That's a very common theme for Israelis, and also our staff is mixed of Jewish Israelis and Palestinian Israelis. And all of us are experiencing this with a deep sense of mourning and loss and grief, but also the fears and the experiences are different. So those were the experiences of the first couple of days. And then ever since then, we've also been beginning to grapple with the attacks on Gaza and with the attacks on human and civil rights inside Israel and in the West Bank, which are the scope of which is unprecedented. And so we've been, on the one hand, busy being very, mourning and worrying, and also very, very busy with the intensive work that we've been doing. And also, just to add to this, there's no schools in Israel, so all of the children are at home as we're trying to deal with all of that. So it's been pretty intense.
And one thing that I know you've shared with me, I've now had many conversations with Noah, so I'm going to fill in some stuff. But you shared with me, you put your kids to bed, and I know very much that routine. My daughter is here, by the way. She just came. Hi.
Thank you for coming.
So I know the routine. I read the Harry Potter chapter every night. But you've also shared with me that once your kids are down, you go then volunteer. So like at 9 p.m., 9:30 p.m., when all of us are maybe winding down, you go volunteer, which I think is kind of common right now in Israel.
Yes.
Because so can you speak about that?
Yeah. So I think it's in the context of one of the overwhelming experiences is the disappearance of government. I mean, the Israeli government has been, since the attack and since the attack, been in shock and unable to provide even very basic services. And a lot of the people who were demonstrating against the government have switched to supporting the people who are evacuated, supporting the people who have the families of the people who have been kidnapped. And it's, on the one hand, it's very concerning to see the dysfunction in government, but on the other hand, it's really inspiring to see Israelis of all sorts volunteering to help the evacuees. And I've shared this story that I was volunteering in the local Jerusalem, it's called the headquarters. And so what you do is you get texts from all sorts of people, and then you try and find whatever it is they need. So I got a text last Thursday from a woman who was in Kfar Aza, which is one of the most devastatingly attacked communities. And she was staying in Netanya, which is like 90 minutes drive from Jerusalem. And she
Which
wrote,
in Israel is like the equivalent of New York to San Francisco. That's how they think of it.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And she wrote that her son has not spoken since Saturday after what he had witnessed, and that he has now spoken for the first time and asked for his PlayStation, which of course they had left at their home that had been burnt. So I got the details of the PlayStation. There were a lot of specs there, and I, texted all of the different groups, and immediately somebody said, "I have this PlayStation, and we're giving it to the kid." And then another volunteer came and said, "We're going to drive it to Netanya tonight, so that the kid has it tonight and doesn't have to wait till tomorrow." And it's that kind of volunteerism and good faith. And I have to say that it's, again, very different from the American experience, maybe. It's shared. There's a headquarters in Jerusalem, but also there's headquarters in Rahat, which is a Bedouin Arab village, where Bedouin women are trying to see what they can do to help the people who have been evacuated. So it's the government is being replaced by really strong and united forces in civil society.
So I thought it was very important to have this grounding because I wanted to paint a picture of what life looks like right now before we shift a bit. And I should have mentioned, I'm going to be talking to Noa for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions, so there'll be plenty of time for that. But I want to shift for a second, and I want to talk about the issue of civil liberties in times of crisis. Right? There's been a lot of comparisons of October 7th to 9/11 here in the United States. And I know when I talk to my students about 9/11, they're like, "We weren't born yet." I was, and it was my first day as an attorney was September 10th, 2001 in New York City. My second day was 9/11. And then when I joined the ACLU, my portfolio was national security issues, right? Working, I represented Arab, Muslim, and South Asian men who were being forced to register with the US government. I worked on behalf of the 9/11, what we call the 9/11 detainees. I don't want to harp on that, but the point was, in the United States after 9/11, there's a lot of recognition now, 20 years later, that civil liberties were needlessly sacrificed in the name of national security. But in the heat of the moment, what may seem so clear now wasn't clear at all. And we face a lot of criticism, right, as ACLU attorneys, talking about the need, to avoid, ethnic and racial profiling, surveillance, secrecy, and so forth. So before I get into the questions of, what is happening in Israel right now internally when it comes to finding that balance, make the case for why, right? Why is it important to protect civil liberties in times of crisis?
I think that one of the impacts of grief, I've been reading a lot about this in the past weeks, is the erosion of empathy. And it's, people are so full of grief that they're losing their ability to see the humanity in other people who are not exactly like them. Which empathy and humanity are the basis of our civil rights work, because in order to, it's the basis of understanding that every single person has value and deserves their human rights. The straw that I'm holding on to is that I know, and the literature says that it's a temporary thing, that the empathy, the ability to be empathetic comes back after a few weeks, but the gut reaction or the emotional reaction often comes with a lot of civil rights violations. And we've seen that this is unfortunately by far not the first war that ACRI has had to deal with, although the implications of this war are more severe and more dramatic on human rights than the ones that we've seen at least in the past 20, 30 years. But the case for why the protection is important are multiple. First of all, kind of from the practical point of view, the slippery slope of we know that times of crisis can be used by anti-democratic governments, like the one we have in Israel, to take away rights and then not restore them after the emergency situation is over. All of the legislation procedures are accelerated in times of war, and all of the checks and balances are weaker. But also, I think that from a values perspective and from an, the reminding ourselves all the time that human rights are a basic value and should be protected are helpful in grounding us in this moment.
Yeah. So with that grounding, which I think is very important, can you describe a bit of some of what you've seen inside Israel since October 7th, some of the cases that your organization has been working on?
So just to kind of clarify what ACRI does, ACRI, we see our mandate as protecting human rights in all of the areas that Israel controls. So that's Israel, East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. And we've seen human rights violations in all areas, but I'll start with inside Israel. We've seen some of the issues that we've been dealing with are kind of basic socioeconomic issues. Because we're in a COVID-like crisis, a lot of businesses are closed or not able to operate. A lot of the children are at home. And so we're doing basic socioeconomic rights work in terms of ensuring debt freeze and no disconnections of electricity and water at this time. We're just looking at poor communities all over Israel. The second layer that we're working on is the issue of access to shelters against bombs. The Iron Dome system has rendered missiles very ineffective if people have safe rooms or access to shelters, and some of the communities have much less access, including poor communities in Jewish towns, and most dramatically, the non-recognized villages in the non-recognized Bedouin villages in the Negev, in the south of Israel, where we've seen many casualties, including children. So we're trying to advocate. We have tried in the past and lost in court to get a resolution mandating a decision to make mandating the state to put shelters in the non-recognized Bedouin villages. We failed, but we are trying a different legal tactic, and we're also trying international pressure. Other levels that we're seeing of civil rights violations are police brutality against demonstrations, including demonstrations of family members of people who have been kidnapped, who have been beaten up by police when they came to advocate for a release of the prisoners, and including protests in support of civilians in Gaza that have received massive police brutality, unlike anything that we've seen in the past months. So we've worked against that. We've seen mass arrests of people for different expressions on social media. For example, expressions like terrorism is the root, the occupation is the root of terrorism. One of my colleagues who is a head of an NGO in Israel was arrested for that.
For just putting that on social media.
Just putting that on social media. Another TikTok influencer, a major Palestinian TikTok influencer, was arrested for posting from the Quran on her TikTok saying, "Only Allah is the winner." Things that are not at all connected to terrorism or supporting terrorism people have been penalized, and we are working very intensively on both providing aid to the people who have been targeted, but also looking at the larger policies involved in that. Another layer of protection of civil rights is free media. That's also being challenged, and the Israeli government, we think, may be attempting to close the Al Jazeera station in Israel in the next few days, and we're monitoring that, and we'll appeal if we need to.
Because there was a law that passed the Knesset.
Yes. So after the war begun, there was an emergency regulation, which is a quicker process than regular legislation, stating that the Minister of Defense will be able to close a media outlet if he deems that it threatens the security of Israel. This is very general terms. We advocated against that, and then the language was changed to say a foreign media outlet. We advocated against that, and they added that there needs to be concrete proof of the damage to Israeli security, and that it needs to be reviewed by a judge. Still, I'm not sure that they won't try and close the TV station, and we are monitoring. And the last issues that I want to bring out, and they're also kind of echoing from American history. We've had, there are about 10,000 Gazans who have permits to be in Israel and work. And on October 7th, we think that about 1,000 of them were inside Israel, legally, not connected at all to the attack. And then, from what we understand, they were interned in one of the military camps in the West Bank. Their licenses, their permits to be in Israel were revoked, but of course they can't go back to Gaza because the border is closed. And we filed, this Monday, we filed a habeas corpus because we don't know who they are, they don't have access to a lawyer, we don't know what they're being charged with, and from what we understand, they've done nothing wrong. Another issue of canceling permits was for Palestinians from the West Bank. There are over 100,000 Palestinians from the West Bank who have permits to be in Israel. Those licenses were also, those permits were also revoked. At the first stage, also permits of people who are protected, LGBT people fleeing persecution, women fleeing domestic violence, and Palestinians who are married to Israeli citizens, their permits were revoked, and we managed through our legal action to reverse that. And that, so overall, it's a really intense time of work and attack from all fronts, and also we as an organization are being attacked more than usual, and we're going to consider next week increasing our security as our staff is facing a lot of
so much of this is so reminiscent of 9/11. I'm thinking of 6 weeks after 9/11, Congress passes the Patriot Act, which includes provisions in it that were incredibly broad on how to define what is support of domestic, what is domestic terrorism. And it's something that we advocated against. So much is going on that you forgot, and again, this is where I add stuff, that one of the most outrageous things that's happened was the chief of police. So in Israel, it's a small country, so it's not like the United States where there are numerous chiefs of police, like the Princeton chief of police, the Philly chief of police. There's one chief of police. And there was a demonstration that was against, the bombardment or the invasion of Gaza. And he went on the bullhorn and he said, and this is mostly Jewish Israelis, and he went on the bullhorn and said, okay, well, if any of you want to support Gaza, I'll put you on a bus, or I'll send you there. For the chief of police to say that, and people are engaging in their, free speech rights. And I know that's something Acre then filed.
We filed a complaint against him, and we'll try and pursue it until it's...
And again, I don't want to emphasize, and maybe this will come up during, just remember the grounding that Noah gave first of why it's important, even in times of crisis, to protect civil liberties. I think it's very important to keep that grounding when you think of this. So I want to shift also for a second and talk a bit more about Gaza. Israel is in a state of war right now, but there are rules also involving war, and a lot of times it's hard to know what's happening when you're in the midst of it. There's a lot of disinformation out there. There's a lot of misinformation. For many outside looking in right now, it looks devastating, right? So how is Acre approaching this issue right now?
Yeah. It is devastating, absolutely. One of the frustrating things about human rights litigation is that our ability to stop atrocities as they're happening is very limited. most of what we can do is in the after. What we're trying to do right now is use the precedents that we've secured in the past in order to ensure humanitarian access into Gaza. ACRI's secured very important precedents in terms of water access and electricity, and we're trying to expand that into other goods as well. In terms of other violations of international law, these are things that are usually collected after the war and analyzed and reported, and I'm sure we'll be working on this for months and years to come to understand what has happened and how it can be addressed.
Yeah.
And I also want to just make sure that we don't forget the West Bank, where there are multiple very troubling developments. This morning I said in our lecture that 79 Palestinians in the West Bank have died, and I just saw that 8 more have died today. So 87 Palestinians.
When you say die, you mean killed?
Killed. Both with clashes with the IDF and also clashes with Israeli settlers. And so that is a very, very disturbing trend that is mostly happening under the radar. I saw that President Biden made a statement about it and very concrete demands from Israel to make sure that the violence against Palestinians in the West Bank stops today. That was his demand.
He said that today.
He said that today, and he asked for changes today. So I'm hoping that will move a little bit, but that's also very concerning. And in addition to that, there are other human rights violations in the West Bank, mostly in the format of blockades inside the West Bank, curtailing movement from one place to another, blocking access to hospitals, to schools, to workplaces.
And this is in the West Bank?
This is in the West Bank.
Okay, I want to shift gears for a second and talk about what your world looked like before October 7th, and you kind of hinted on October 6th, right? Just to give some context, I think some of you may know this, some of you may not. Noa spoke about it before, but the biggest issue in Israel on October 6th was this proposal by the Netanyahu government to overhaul the judicial system in the state, in the country. And it's something that Professor Shepley and others have written a lot about, not only in the context of Israel, but a trend that we're seeing happening across the world. And you should know that Professor Shepley's book, is
Professor Shepley is like Madonna in Israel. People have read her book, they admire her. We're supposed to come last week. I think people are mourning and hoping that you'd come in a different time.
She's written about autocratic, authoritarian, using the law as a way to build an authoritarian nation. And that was very much like the debate in Israel. And it had many formats and there were different phases to it, but in its essence, it was basically a proposal to strip the judiciary of its authority to overturn acts of either the legislature or the government. And in Israel, that's a particularly troubling thing because Israel really just has like 2 branches of government because it's a parliamentary system, right? So the parliament elects or chooses the prime minister. So they're kind of on the same side. So the judiciary is the one check, right, on government.
And also no constitution.
And the other complication is that there's no constitution. And even though in Israel's Declaration of Independence, there's a call to convene a constitutional convention within a year or something to create it never happened. So Israel was in the midst of this debate, and Noah hinted to this, and I think this is an accurate figure, and you're the one who taught me this figure. There were 39 straight weeks of protests against the judicial overhaul, where on average, there were like 150,000 people at each protest.
I think an average is probably 200.
200,000.
Yeah.
On a country with the population of New Jersey. So imagine if in New Jersey, the state that you're in, although I know sometimes Princeton students are like, we're not in New Jersey. The state that you're in, imagine if there were protests every week of 200,000 people against a government proposal.
Or if we look at it in US terms, imagine that 2% of the population, 6 million people, were on the streets every single week.
For 39 straight weeks. October 7th was going to be the 40th straight week of those protests. So it was a heated, it really captured everything. I mean, this is what people's identity was wrapped. So the question I have for you, Noah, with that very long wind up, what does that look like now? Like, what is it now, post-October 7th?
I have many thoughts on this. First, I think that I have some friends here who who I've known for many years, and they know that I've been obsessed with the anxiety about the anti-democratic revolution in Israel for many, many years, way before this last government. And I am not worried about that right now because I think that the moment for that has passed. It's not clear that it won't return, but right now it's off the agenda, and I think that the government has very little capacity to do that right now. And the infrastructure for the demonstrations has really shifted towards helping the evacuees and the families of the hostages. And I want to say something else also about you're very right in describing the mood in Israel that was completely focused on the anti-democratic revolution that the government was trying to execute. But in the meantime, let me say it this way, the demonstrations were only focused on the anti-democratic revolution, and they disregarded many of the other aspects of what was going on in Israel and the injustices in Israel. And many of us were frustrated about this narrow view of the crisis. And we all knew that the populist government would have severe prices. I don't think anybody imagined the crisis that we're seeing right now. But I want to describe the process as I saw it and think about how it would relate today. Very early in the protest, I was invited to speak on a Saturday night demonstration. And I was asked to send my speech ahead of time, which I did. Right, like an hour and a half, they said that we need it for the media. So like an hour before the demonstration, I sent the speech. And we had our 4 children wrapped up in so many scarves and coats, all ready to go. None of them were crying. And then
scarves and coats. It was probably like 70 degrees.
No, it's February in Jerusalem. It's like 40. We're not used to that. And then I get a call from the organizer and saying, "Listen, we just have one small request. Can you please not mention the occupation in your speech?" And I was a little shocked, and it was a really bad moment to cancel because we at ACRI had already publicized extensively that I would speak, and they had the protests had publicized that I would speak. It was a terrible moment to cancel, and we did a very quick consultation with the staff, and we decided, I called them and I said, I really have a lot of respect for you, but ACRI can't accept this censorship, so I will have to withdraw. Oh. 5 minutes later, after we had unwrapped all the children, they called and said, "Okay, come and speak."
Oh, and he said the O word?
Of course.
Okay.
And actually, it's been very interesting because ever since then, in Jerusalem, every single week they spoke about the occupation.
Yeah. Lead by example.
But I think that, I'll also share this, that a few months ago, one of ACRI's major donors in Israel, who is a psychiatrist, asked for a meeting with me. And he said that my work and his are the same now. And I was very surprised. And he said that his work dealing with people suffering from a mental health crisis. So people, come to him with depression or anxiety and feeling horrible. And all they want is to go back to before this crisis ever happened. And he has to tell them, there's no going back. There's only moving forward, and you have to address the issues that you've been suppressing and avoiding and not dealing with your entire life in order to feel what you felt like before this crisis. And it's a perfect analogy to the protest movement that was avoiding, in its majority, avoiding the issue of the occupation. And I think that we can no longer do that. And in that sense, this crisis is an opportunity.
So I have a lot more questions, but I do want to open it up. Let me just ask one more, and then we'll see what kind of Q&A there is, and if there isn't, I have plenty more questions. But Ooh, there's so many more things that I wanted. Oh, should we do the uplifting? All right, no. Actually, I'm going to ask two more questions.
Go for it.
First, I want you.
You're building a lot of expectations with the uplifting.
All right, let me just go to that one. It's not really uplifting, but I wanna put some perspective in this. So look, to me, I can listen to Noah talk all day about the other kind of work that ACRI has done, right? ACRI is the leading organization in Israel around LGBT rights, same-sex marriage, women's rights, reproductive rights, which, by the way, is now abortion. The right to an abortion is now an issue in Israel, even though it never was. But a lot of the same kind of legal, backlash on abortion rights that we've seen in the United States, you're now seeing in Israel. But let me ask the question that we've talked about it before, and that is, look, I don't know how many people around this auditorium I've been glued to the media over the last 2 weeks in a very unhealthy way. Honestly, I need to take a break, but it's hard not to just follow everything. But one of the glimmers of hope that I had, and I talked to Professor Fayyad about this earlier too, is thinking about 1970s Israel, and actually 1970s region, right, where you had a war with Egypt that in many ways, that people are drawing a lot of analogies in 1973, right? Israel caught off guard, major failure of intelligence, Israel's attacked, it's, almost doesn't survive, right? Against, this large, military. 1973, and then 1979, you have a peace treaty with Egypt, which is crazy, right? If you were living during this moment in 1973 to think, my God, 6 years from now, we're actually going to shake hands, and it's a peace treaty that's actually been good and sustained, it's ongoing. So is there something there for us now who are living during this horrible moment with so much death, so much mourning, so much grief? Is there a window of opportunity 6 years from now, or am I just living in fantasy land?
So as I said, the ground is still moving, and we can't know, I think. But I'll say two things. One is, if we look at the Gaza border and how Israelis have treated it, it's been all about figuring out technological military ways to avoid threat, right? Israel and the US invested billions in building a wall between Gaza and Israel. And then, some factions figure out a way to throw rockets over the wall. So Israel and the US invested billions in the Iron Dome system that rendered a lot of the missiles ineffective. And then, other militants figured out ways to dig tunnels under the wall. And so Israel and the US just last year finished a $60 billion investment in a detection system of tunnels that are being dug under the wall. And none of that provided security on October 7th. And so I think that Israelis will now no longer feel secure with another, the person who tries to offer another military solution for the Gaza situation. I don't think that would really make Israelis feel secure, which is our opportunity here. And
opportunity for a political solution.
Yes, I think so. I hope so. That's early days to tell, but I think that a political solution would provide more security than another military solution that would be questioned. Kind of as I said in the beginning, this moment is a tectonic moment, and I find a lot of comfort in reading history. So I've been reading about the after effects of the pogroms in Eastern Europe, and those were the moments that created, the innovative idea of Zionism and the mass immigration of Jews to the U.S. And I think that, I don't think that the solutions that we will come up with now are the same types of solutions, but I think it was a really moment of creativity of saying, we cannot continue to live this way. There has to be a better solution that guarantees us a better life. And I think that that kind of creative thinking will begin in a few weeks in the aftermath, and I'm hopeful that that will lead us to solutions that we can't see today.
Great. Okay, with that note, and again, I have a ton more questions, but I don't want to, suck all the energy. So why don't we open it up to Q&A? There are microphones set up on the aisles. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask Noah? Otherwise, I have many more. Okay, why don't we start off up top, up there, and then we'll go to you. Oh, and Lauren here will act as... Okay, so you'll choose the...
I want to preface my question with my very limited knowledge on what happened in Myanmar, but I know the ICJ was involved there when Myanmar deported about 1 million Rohingya people. So now, earlier you were mentioning about the fact that the work permits of some of the Palestinian people in Israel were completely revoked, and we're also talking about a uniform retaliation on all Palestinian people in Gaza. So I'm wondering if the ICJ is gonna get involved at all, or what you think is gonna happen on that front, because I also know and I believe that the ICJ is already involved in Israel in regards to its occupation on the land. So anyway, I just want to know what happens, and if now the revoking these permits and also this retaliation is now going to be a part of the calculus for whatever ICJ recommends for Israel.
That's a great question. In terms of the revoking of the permits, it's a temporary revocation, so I don't know that the ICJ would be involved in that, but I am pretty sure that the ICJ will include what's going on right now in their ongoing investigation of what's happening in Israel and the West Bank and Gaza.
Yeah. And like I said, the revocation of permits is really reminiscent to me of what happened. I mean, it's different in the sense of, the U.S. is different, but right after 9/11 in the United States, we saw, the roundups of Arab, Muslim, and South Asian immigrants, non-citizens, using immigration authorities. In that time, we still called the INS, Immigration and Naturalization Services, and the same sort of practices where people were held incommunicado, without access to counsel, and they were held for weeks. And then weeks later, were just released, literally with no explanation, no nothing. They were just released. And it took the U.S. years to even just document it. Eventually, there was a whole Inspector General report. Litigation on the issue, I think, is still ongoing. I think just a couple of years, a year ago, there was finally some movement in the courts. So these are all the issues that are going to play out, I think, in the legal system for years and years to come. And I'm sure ACRU will be on the front lines of it.
Yeah, we can hear you. So I think,
especially since consuming, I don't know, I've consumed lots of different sources of media, and it's just propaganda coming from Israeli media, honestly.
so I think that consuming multiple sources of media is always a good idea. And the work that we do obviously has we work with the media, and we work we work in social media, and we try to bring the cases that we bring to the attention of the Israeli public. And I think that the power in litigation is a lot about the fact that you get to set the story and you get to tell it and not only react to what the government is doing. So that's a big part of what we do and a big part of how we choose the cases that we lead with.
But speak more. I mean, I know ACRI, for example, way before October 7th. I mean, you have a whole educational arm that goes into the schools.
Yeah.
You have a person whose entire job portfolio and their team is focused on going into Israeli schools and actually educating them about what it means to be an Arab citizen of Israel. What do their lives look like? What is the occupation? So ACRI was heavily invested in trying to break down the silos and build bridges long before. And in fact, your past career, before you became executive director of ACRI, was at an organization called MEET, where your whole job was to bring together Palestinian students and from the occupied territories and Israeli students to work together. So there's a lot happening that I'm sure you will going to start doubling down on.
Yeah, absolutely. And the challenges, one of the challenges in wars is that people go back into their in-group and focus on that, and that will have to be unpacked. And that's a long process, both legal, communication, and education. Absolutely.
And the one thing I'll add, I mean, I consume a lot of Israeli media, and I agree there's a lot of propaganda. I think that's the right term. But there's also a lot of critical thinking. And I would actually argue that, particularly in newspapers like Haaretz, which is like the New York Times of Israel. I get it, but you were talking about Israeli media, and the reporters for Haaretz are Israeli reporters. That's a different question about who consumes it, but you were talking about Israeli media.
And I don't think that that's an accurate. I'll check that, but I don't think that that's an accurate. Certainly not in the past year. The readership of Haaretz has really increased since the anti-democratic revolution. But I'll check the numbers. I don't know them, but I'm
we'll
not
follow
sure.
up on that. But actually, I think some of the, some of the writings that you see in there, I think that writings that if it was like in the American media, it would be like considered anti-Semitic, right? But there's like critical thinking, I think, happening. But it's also absolutely true in the same way that right after 9/11 in the US, even organizations like the ACLU felt like it couldn't be too critical because it would be perceived as anti-American. I remember those conversations. I think you're absolutely facing that in Israel right now, 2 weeks into it. But I think as the weeks progress, as the months progress, as the facts on the ground begin to change, I do think there will be more of a critical conversation. And part of it also in the polling, you see right now in Israel, there's complete lack of trust of the government right now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just like, no one trusts it. And I think you're gonna end up seeing something different happen. Now, it's unclear what that different will be. And I think it could swing in either direction. But I do think that the story, I think your analogy of an earthquake that is still shaking the ground is really the right one. And we don't know where it's going to land.
Yeah, and I think that the polling are pretty predictive and also accurate, at least of this moment, and very hard to predict what will happen, but they're definitely showing a swing, not to the left, but to the center from where we are now. So that's also, if we're talking about uplifting, that's a cause for optimism as well.
Is Lauren in charge? No, you gave up. She's choosing who's speaking next, but I know this gentleman has. Oh, and Dean Jamal has her hand up.
You were speaking of a possible window of opportunity. Does that require that the West Bank and Gaza speak with the same voice?
It requires many, many different things to align in the right direction. I'm not sure that that's necessary. That would definitely be an advantage.
Thank you so much, Noah and Udi. Thank you so much, Noah and Udi. So one of the things that we're hearing about a lot about is the situation of the hostages, and we're getting in the media just bits and pieces of that. There's really substantial conversations going on with the Qataris mediating. Then we hear that no, that those were over exaggerated. Can you tell us anything about what's going on and what are those negotiations looking like?
So I honestly have no better sources than yours in terms of what is going on with the hostages. I can speak about the hostages and the situation of their families. The hostages are over 200 people from different communities, both from southern communities around the border, and also there was a big music festival, so a lot of participants in the music festival. And the people who were kidnapped are extremely diverse from many different countries, including migrant workers who were in Israel, including Bedouins and Palestinians. It's a very diverse group of people. And I think that what they are feeling is that the Israeli government is not really prioritizing their cause. Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu nominated a person to lead the hostage crisis, also the communication with the families and everything. And that person he nominated is very loyal to him, but has no knowledge of Middle Eastern politics or no history of hostage negotiations. I spoke with one of the ambassadors that we usually work with, and he spoke about how he went to a meeting with the hostage crisis manager, expecting to talk about the hostages from their country, and they, what he got was yelled at because they supported the Oslo Accords in the 90s. So the families are feeling very abandoned. There's a lot of organizing. There's a group of families right now in the U.S., and I think that international pressure will play a very important role in the secure of the hostages. Just as a reminder, there are babies, there are elderly, there are people who are severely injured. It looks like there are women who were raped. A vast array of people who should be able to get back home.
While I have the microphone, on October 6th, there were kind of two huge divisions in Israeli society, one between the people who had supported the government and still continued to support them versus the democracy movement. And then within the democracy movement, there was a huge split between the people who thought, let's just take the issue narrowly about the judiciary, and those who thought we had an imperfect democracy to begin with, this is the chance to really do it right. And I wonder what's happened to those two splits after the massacre of October 7th, and also what's happened since. I saw one opinion poll that said that more than 90% of Jewish Israelis blamed Netanyahu for what happened, which sounds like he, A, may be losing his base, and B, that people may be rethinking exactly what Israeli democracy might require. So I wonder if what's happening in domestic politics around support for Netanyahu and what people think of as a future of Israeli democracy.
So the first part of your question is easier to answer in the sense that the constant polling is showing Netanyahu has lost his majority in the polls before October 7th. But the drop we're seeing for him in the polls we have not seen since he lost the elections in 1996 after his first term. It's a dramatic drop in numbers. Again, Netanyahu is called the wizard, and he has survived many crises, but this looks like it will be very, very difficult for him to survive this. And also, at least in the media, there are reports of even inside his own party, Likud, there are calls for him to be ousted, which is very good news. In terms of the in-depth analysis that we're capable of in this room, of kind of what this looks like afterwards, Israelis are not there. They are deep, deep in mourning and funerals that are still ongoing and worry for the hostages. That is, it's difficult to convey the deep, deep sense of tragedy that is still ongoing in the minds of Israelis in a way that is very relentless. And because of because of that, I think that the long-term thinking is still it's still hard to say where it will go. But I think that the issues that Israelis have avoided for so long, and in the hope that the wall and the military solutions will just hide it and people won't have to think about it, I don't know that that is sustainable in the long term. I mean, we all knew that it wouldn't be sustainable in the long term, but I think that in a shorter term, that may come to public debate in a way that hasn't happened before.
So I think we can do one more question if there is one, and then I have a final question. Susan.
Noah, thanks so much again for being here. I was really captured by the idea and the understanding that you're a rabbi as well. And I'm assuming that this is all of a piece, this fight for a just and ethical world. But I was just curious in this crazy moment, are there any things you're doing that are specific to your ordination?
Great question.
That's a great question. I volunteered to do funerals and Shiva visits. So Shiva is a customary mourning period in Jewish tradition. But I think that what we are really experiencing in many ways is a spiritual crisis of vast dimensions in terms of how we think about the future, how we think about humanity, how we think about cruelty, and how we respond to it in ways that are not replicating it and just creating a cycle. And to me, personally, these are all deeply spiritual questions that I'm grappling with. And so my faith helps me in those moments. But I want to also say that the Jewish debate is very powerful and helpful for people on the individual level. But I also want to recognize that when we speak Jewishly, it is excluding the Palestinian citizens of Israel and minimizing their role. So for us as ACRI as an organization, it's very important to keep the language secular. But for me as a person and as an individual, it's been a big source of help at this time.
So the last question that I have before, and then everyone, we have a reception next door. We can continue the conversation, and I encourage everyone to come to it. What is your takeaway? What are kind of your last thoughts for everyone in this room, right? So for students who are really interested in this issue, for faculty, for the members of the public, what should we be doing right now?
So I think that, first of all, we should be able to hold multiple truths at the same time. I spoke briefly about the issue of the blockades in the West Bank, and last week I was interviewed about them, and there are multiple details that I did not know. So I referred the reporter to, it was a foreign press reporter, to the lawyer who is in charge of human rights in the occupied Palestinian territories in ACRI. And I told him, we hang up the phone, and I sent him her details and told him in a message that she may not be available because her sister-in-law has been kidnapped and she's meeting with the Romanian Prime Minister today. So text her and she'll get back to you when she can. And he called me back and he said, she's working on human rights of Palestinians today when her sister has been kidnapped into Gaza. And her answer was, of course, we keep the best we can do is keep our humanity at this time and keep working for the vision of democracy and equality that we want. And so I urge all of us to remember that. And when there is such a big pull to see one side and completely ignore the other. I think that usually those kinds of perspectives are skewed and not helpful. I want to we haven't touched upon is that Professor Shipley was demoted last week from the favorite American in Israel to the second favorite American in Israel by President Biden, who has, the love Israelis now have for President Biden is kind of astounding, and certainly in light of the fact that they supported Trump, the majority of Israelis supported Trump on October 6th. But now it's not like people are saying, we support Biden. They are writing essays about how wonderful he is in this way and how wonderful he is in that way and how he speaks and how he stands and his voice and his demeanor. And it's pretty overwhelming. And President Biden has really placed himself in a remarkable place to have influence over Israeli behavior. I think that was his plan. It's really, as a student of diplomacy, this has been quite a feat that he was able to achieve, and it's going to be very, very difficult for the Israeli government to ignore his advice going forward. And so as Americans, you have a significant role to play in making sure that he continues to insist on humanitarian aid, on adherence to international law, on the return of the hostages, and specifically on return of all of the hostages and not just the American hostages. So I think that this is a very significant role to play.
Great. On that note, I want to thank everyone, and please join us for reception.
Thank you.